Hey, what's up? My name is Clayton, and this is the Tuesday Waiver Wire edition of the Fantasy Football Talk Show. Um, yeah, I'm a little bit behind, like 20 minutes or so. I had a wake to go to today, and not feeling so hot. So this is probably going to be a quick show, uh, but wanted to go over some waiver wire ads this week, just briefly. And again, leave most of everything to the Friday show, where we're going to have probably a bit to talk about because this Friday is. What do we have this Friday? Well, the Thursday night game coming up, and honestly, it's just been a really interesting. Well, this is the first week in fantasy football where I haven't lost somebody during to injury during the season. So it for me it was a good week. I also I took my fifth game in a row, in my money league. So that is always good to get on a good winning streak. But the waiver wire for me is going to be kind of interesting. You're now dealing with a lot of bye weeks for most of you who are out there, um, and you're going to be looking for people to fill in those spots. Um, some of those are positions that are going to be easy to fill. Streaming your defense or looking at picking up a kicker for a bye week replacement. But some of those are going to be more difficult. There's still a lot of quarterbacks out with injury, and that's very tough to deal with, especially if you're in a league like I am that um, overcompensates quarterbacks. Quarterback touchdowns being were 6 instead of 4, or you're in a league like a PPR league where you have a very few players who get enough targets to warrant ownership. So we're gonna kind of focus on that this week, looking at those two, not those positions, but we're gonna do all positions like we always do. But in terms of bye week replacement, we're gonna look at why. We're gonna look at targets and touches for the first time. Uh, Usually that's a position that we kind of not a position, but usually that's a stat line that we tend to ignore. Um, one player who comes to mind and who was available for me going into last week was Danny Woodhead. He's not a person you think about as a huge target getter, but he's doesn't get a lot of handoffs, but gets a lot of passes out of the backfield, enough to warrant addition. And he had 2 touchdowns this week as a receiver. So it's those kind of players that you're going to want to add, slide into your fantasy team, um, so that they do a lot with their targets, they do a lot with their touches, and give you the max value when it comes to going forward. There's also a couple running back committees that have started to get clearer, and those are where we can. Those may provide some value. The two that I'm thinking of are the Kansas City Chiefs, who without Jamal Charles, we weren't sure who they were going to turn towards, and it ended up being Jacandrick West. He thoroughly dominated the touches over Niles Davis this week. He had over 100 yards. He scored a touchdown, and the Chiefs won. So it's a formula that the coaching staff is going to be eager to emulate. And because of that, Jacandrick West is probably the player to go for. And I know a lot of people picked him up. A lot of people who had Jamal Charles might have picked him up. A lot of people who didn't. But he had a very mediocre week after that. So there may have been in your league, might be one of those. Mine wasn't. I was actually the one who picked him up in my money league. But you might be in a league that has somebody who saw his one bad week and dropped him, or benched him, or was just overall down on him as a viable replacement. And because of that's somebody you can target for a trade offer. Now is probably the time where you're going to want to step up looking at trades, looking at the weaknesses in your team, because you only have 2 or 3 weeks left before you most leagues have their trade deadlines. Usually by Thanksgiving, trading is kind of done. So I would be very, very aware of what your league trade deadline is and what position you really want to go after. And I'm going to, right before we end the broadcast, I'll kind of show you just an example of what you can do in terms of looking for a trade. So with that, let's just go right into the waiver wire ads, and we'll start with the quarterback position. So as always, we're going to look at 10 and 12 team. The 10 team that I'm using is a pretty competitive league that I'm in. The 12 team I'm using is a pretty competitive league I'm in. The 10 team I'm using is the Twitch TV league that we drafted on stream many weeks ago. So that is probably gives you a pretty good grasp of the two scales. Like one more competitive, your friends, everybody's paying attention. Another that was just a pug league. So, there's varying levels of skill and understanding of how fantasy football works. So, kind of get you somewhere in between. You'll find a player who is available for the league that you're in. So this is the actual 12-team league. And you notice one name is Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning may or may not be available in your league. He's had a rough season. Jamie Vardy? I'm not familiar with that name. I'll check for you. Yeah, not a player, man. Sorry. The Newcastle Jets. Maybe. I'm not familiar with the Newcastle Jets. The New York Jets aren't bad, man. They barely lost to the Patriots this week. So, but I think we're talking about a different kind of fantasy football. But anyway, the quarterback position this week, whether you're looking at Peyton Manning, who potentially has an interesting game against Green Bay. Hey, what up, Drinking? How you doing, man? Just getting started. Nothing much has happened so far. The Savior Diggs. I picked him up in 2 leagues. My competitive money league, I wasn't able to grab him. I actually had. He got through the waiver wire. He got through the waiver wire deadline on Wednesday. However, I still didn't know if I had a starting quarterback. With Peyton Manning on bye, Tyrod Taylor not sure of where his situation was, and that got cleared up towards the end of the week. Oh, it was I think it was Thursday. He was officially declared out. And then Ben Roethlisberger practicing, but all signs pointing to him not playing. I ended up needing a quarterback, so I waited on grabbing. Diggs, and some another team ended up scooping him up before the weekend. So it was obviously somebody people were eyeing, and I figured that, but I needed a quarterback. I ended up winning this week, and the quarterback I played did well. His team was terrible. I went with Hoyer, so it was good. Um, but yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get him. But yeah, Zelo and Greenman, I have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah. I ended up winning though, mainly because of Hoyer. Like Hoyer had a relatively good fantasy game. He had 3 touchdowns. He had 1 interception, close to 300 passing yards, a little bit under that. So it ended up being a decent overall starting quarterback. But I mean, obviously, I'm not playing him going forward, or I'm not planning to, because Ben Roethlisberger is probably going to be back this week. Oh yeah, he had a really good game. He had over 100 yards. The touchdown grab, I don't did. You, I'm sure you were watching the game. But the touchdown grab he made was quite like it was an impressive layout catch. All right, now you're spinning stuff. So have that timeout. Um, but yeah, it was quite an impressive catch. Like Diggs is gonna, like you were saying, Diggs is a good player. And I feel like the thing that makes him really appealing is Teddy Bridgewater really hadn't found any type of go-to receiver, and that's really important for a young quarterback. A young quarterback tends to latch on to a receiver. Even older quarterbacks who are new to a system tend to latch on to one receiver, and that's the receiver they go to after they go through their progression and don't see anything, or is the first receiver they check in their progression. And if Diggs becomes that for Bridgewater, that's great, especially because Adrian Peterson still seems to be Adrian Peterson. So you're going to have great passing situations for the Vikings, for the foreseeable future. Yeah. So, and I think that's what's going to make him extremely valuable. Like I even floated a trade offer out for him, but it wasn't a great trade offer, but it was enough to get like I traded to get Benjamin earlier in the season. In the same situation, it was the same person who took Diggs who took Benjamin in my league. So I mean, obviously they have a similar eye, and their team is composed pretty similarly to mine. Um, I I'm on a 4-game winning streak in the money league that I'm in, uh, and that's basically based around all of the running backs that I've drafted except Eddie Lacy have had are starting to become very, very consistent. Um, Justin Forsett, even though he had a bad Monday night game, has started to become that consistent 10, 11 point guy. Doug Martin's in the, you know, 18 to 20 point range most weeks. Like he's gone over 100 yards for the last 3 weeks. So it's starting to get to the point where I also have the top tight end in the league. So it's starting to get to the point where I can trust, half of my roster without really having to look at it. There's nobody who I have to sit based on matchup. It's just, put the guy in, plug and play, and go. And that makes it a lot easier. Um, in terms of quarterbacks I'm looking at this week, because I'm not hugely excited about starting Ben Roethlisberger against the Bengals, even though the Bengals, they're a good defense, but they can be beat. Some of the players that I'm looking at are, even though I dropped Peyton Manning, and I was looking at him against Green Bay, mainly because Green Bay, even though they have a young secondary core, they tend to play to the game. They were also coming off a bye, and that's one of the things that scares me. I don't like defense. I don't like teams who are. I don't like players who are playing teams off of buys, Just because if you have a team that's coming off a bye week, especially on defense, they're more apt to have schemed for a week. The coaching staff is more familiar with what their offense is going to do. It's just not a great situation. Denver, however, is coming off a bye as well, so it's kind of even. But still, he's not my favorite. But then again, like I kind of like Ryan Fitzpatrick against Oakland. Um, he did decently against the Patriots. And that's not what I wanted to hit. But he's always like floating near the cusp of like having amazing weeks. Like he in that 295 touchdown, that should have been three. Brandon Marshall actually dropped a touchdown pass in that game, so it could have been even a bigger week for him. Um, I mean, it was his first week actually without an interception. Uh, there's a lot of things I like about Ryan Fitzpatrick, and part of me wants to start him. Um, just because I don't know where Ben Roethlisberger is going to be. Ben Roethlisberger has probably a similar caliber of weapons. Ryan Fitzpatrick, obviously, Brandon Marshall, Eric Decker, Chris Ivory in the backfield, where Ben Roethlisberger has Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown. Yeah, I mean, if in this situation, because I feel like I want somebody who's consistent, and that's the one thing that coming off an injury, I usually like to give that player a week. I don't want to start him, especially if it's an injury that's kept him out a long time. Just have him get back to game speed. And that's why I kind of want to sit Ben. Um, yeah, it could be a shootout with Cincinnati, but that again, the point for especially for quarterbacks, getting back up to speed, getting back to reading defenses, it's not something you can get like out of practice, especially practices where he's just working his way back into throwing. Um, it's just hard for me to say that he's ready to go off jump street. It's a little bit easier with a skill position receiver, or like a receiver. Even a running back can be difficult. Like even Todd Gurley took a couple of games post his injury to really get going, and that was because you running backs like quarterbacks have to see holes, have to see the defense and read the defense. Whereas wide receivers are out on the edges. They make their one cut, they make their one decision, and that's it. Um, I think Fitz gives you against Oakland. Oakland lost Justin Tuck for the season. It gives their rookie, who's supposed to be very talented, chance to play. But at the same time, they're young, they're inexperienced, and the Jets, coming off a loss to the Patriots, are still in the midst of trying. Yeah, when I'm saying that it's an injury, the injury took him out of game time. Like it took him out of game situations. So when I'm the leg injury, yeah, Big Ben he's more mobile than people give him credit for. He's not going to get you a bunch of rushing yards. It's not Tyrod Taylor, but what he does provide you is the ability to move around in the pocket. Um, Kind of step up in the pocket and deliver deep balls, and that's kind of he's had huge, like even his first game where I think he only had one touchdown and one interception. It was over a 300-yard game. His first two games of the season were well over 300 yards. He has plenty of weapons in the offense. I'm not worried about Ben going forward. I'm just saying for this week until he gets back to game speed. And the Bengals are a team that plays very fast. So in terms of getting him back up to game speed, in terms of reading defenses with his eyes, locating where he wants to go with the football, making decisions, that's something that, especially in the quarterback and the running back position, are things that I like to give a week. And that's kind of why I'm looking at Fitz. I feel like Fitz is a very good option this week. I feel like he's been playing better. And the other thing I like about Fitz, too, is even though he might not give me Big Ben numbers, he might not give me 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's gonna give me 270 to 280 and 2 touchdowns and probably an interception. That's his stat line. That's what he does week in, week out. And that this week should be enough for me to win. And that's all I need. I need a bye week replacement. And that's what a lot of people are looking for. And what we're kind of talking about this week is just looking at who's a bye replacement, who can tide me over. And I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is one of those players. Yeah, he's the safer option, not the better option, like you were saying. He's the safer option, and in a situation where I feel like I have the advantage on paper in terms of the matchups, and this is one thing that you have to look at when you're looking at who you need off the waiver wire. If you're in a position where you have their best players are going against bad matchups while your best players are going against good ones, and you only need 1 or 2 pieces to fill in, go with the safer option. Sometimes the safer option isn't the better option. Sometimes you're going to leave some points on the bench. But it's better to be safe and know you're going to get those points to be in a position to win. Would you take Fitz over Stafford, or how about anyone on the waiver wire? I'm not sure what to do with my QB spot right now. Depends on your waiver wire. I mean, QB is a position that a lot of people have been dropping and adding very, freely. Like if I look at the 10-team league, we've got Joe Flacco going against San Diego. That's a good option, especially with Steve Smith back. San Diego's defense is very porous. So I mean, Joe Flacco hasn't been playing well, but Joe Flacco has the arm and has the he has several 300+ yard games, 340, 362, 384. He might not be your every week dude, but he's there. Stafford, I feel like the Lions, even though they lost, they played the Vikings, and the Vikings aren't a bad team. Let me check. Who is Stafford playing against? Let me go to the schedules. Regular season schedule. I don't want week 1. I want week 8. Detroit is going against Cincinnati. Not Cincinnati. Against Kansas City, at Kansas City. I mean, Baltimore has the better matchup. Stafford has better weapons. Stafford, I feel like, has a higher upside in terms of the game. Because what the Lions are going to do is, challenge the secondary of Kansas City. Kansas City has a good secondary, but it's inexperienced and young. Other than Eric Berry, and Eric Berry is still working his way back. I mean, he had an interception this week, but still, getting back to full speed from his cancer situation in this offseason. But him and Peters make a good secondary. I just think that if you're looking for somebody this week, I would probably go with Stafford just because of Calvin Johnson. I mean, at some point you have to look at the two side by side and look at what weapons they have, and Stafford has better weapons. I mean, except at the running back position, I would Steve Smith is a good wide receiver, but he's really up there. He's playing hurt. He's trying to get through his last season. I mean, he's still playing well, still being productive, but Stafford has Calvin Johnson. I mean, and there are but so many teams that have anybody who can match up with Calvin Johnson. The best part about that for Stafford is it doesn't seem this year, even though Calvin Johnson has started to pick up steam in the last few weeks, it doesn't seem like Stafford's forcing it to him. He's spreading it around. The Lions' real problem has been their line on both sides of the ball, not getting pressure on the defensive end, and not really, moving anybody in the running game. Um, I don't feel like they'll be in a blowout with the Chiefs. The Chiefs aren't a really good passing team, so the score might be low, which kind of goes against a Stafford pick. Where I think the San Diego Ravens game would be a much higher scoring game. If I was to take a quarterback based on skill, I would say Stafford. But um, that's mainly because I believe in going with the player who has more weapons around him, especially at the quarterback position. Well, yeah, T.Y. Hilton did it. Lamar Miller is the one that kind of bugs me a little bit, mainly because the Dolphins have been terrible, just outright terrible. I actually started the Dolphins defense this week and got 12 points in standard league. Um, they've just been terrible, and the coaching change really showed who the real Dolphins were, because now they're playing for this interim coach like they haven't at all for their previous one. Yeah, I mean, if you have Stafford, I'd go with him. I feel like Flacco's a good start, but if you have somebody who cost you a high, not a high, but a good draft pick, and who's starting to show signs that he can get back to what he was, I mean, I'd stick with him. I'd stick it out. Especially because it's not a bad matchup this week. It's not like we're talking about Stafford, going in and playing Denver or going against, a hot Rams defense. We're talking about Stafford going against Kansas City, who, got, their second win of the season? Um, I mean, it's not a huge gap. Wow. So he literally traded for a dude who has been disappointing all season, plugged him in, and got up 20 something points. That sucks. Wow, that sucks. Wow. Yeah, that hasn't happened to me this season. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened to me this season. But yeah, I see what you're dealing with. Um, Another quarterback who I don't know if he's available in the 10 team league. I think he's not available in my 12 because somebody picked him up to play him this week because they had a bye. So he might be available later on. Is Teddy Bridgewater. They're going against Chicago. Chicago's defense has been awful all season. Um, the Vikings defense is good enough to force turnovers, so Bridgewater probably will get more opportunities on offense. And the Bears, if they can do anything, they can put 10 men in the box. So I think play action, couple of deep balls to Diggs. It could. Bridgewater might not have a lot of passing yards or have a lot of throws, but he's gonna probably get a couple touchdowns, like 2, 3 touchdowns. I can see easily, because Chicago tends to lose, and when Chicago loses, they lose badly. Um, like very, very badly. I'm trying to find a Chicago receiver. Like their last couple games, they allowed 37 points, 17 to Kansas City, but Kansas City was really struggling. Um, 20 to Oakland, 26 to Seattle, 48 to Arizona, 31 to Green Bay. I mean, Green Bay, Arizona, Detroit, kind of are showcase how bad they can be. Oakland has an okay quarterback, but David Carr isn't anything special. Alex Smith isn't anything special. Russell Wilson put up 26 points. So it's probably more along the lines of a 26 to 30 point performance that you're looking at in terms of what the Vikings are going to score. And I think at least two, more like three of those touchdowns are going to be Bridgewater. Um, yeah, Detroit is a defense that I don't understand. They have everything they need to be a decent defense, but like even in a couple of games they've lost, they've given up very few points. But like against Minnesota, they looked really, really just like they couldn't do anything. Like Adrian Peterson was just running all over them. Um, I just don't really understand Detroit, and Detroit gives up huge, huge numbers. Yeah, I think that the thing that Minnesota gives you though is your O line can be protected when your running game's strong. When they're asked to just move somebody forward and you're handing the ball off enough, it freezes defenders. Like it makes your D linemen, especially your defensive ends, slower off the snap, and that's what is going to give Bridgewater some time. And they're starting to move him. They're starting to move the pocket for him a little bit. And I think that's going to help him too. Like on his touchdown throw to Kyle Rudolph, it was kind of, even though it was goal line, he kind of moved to the right in the pocket. I don't know if it was designed that way, but it looked to be kind of a slight bootleg. Um, so those are the kind of plays that I would say make me not as concerned about the O line, mainly because Adrian Peterson is also a great pass protector. Um, so on blitzes, and the Bears got rid of the threats that I see that made them scary in terms of a pass rushing team. So I'm not as concerned about with the Vikings O line, at least against the Bears. Going forward, maybe, but again, I think that when you have a running back like Adrian Peterson, it alleviates a lot of offensive line problems. But I think that's a lot of the quarterbacks that I was going to talk about. In terms of running backs, the big name is probably going to be Darren McFadden. Uh, with his game against the Giants, he kind of, vaulted himself into number one in the pecking order in Dallas. Um, he's going against Seattle this week, so it's a pickup for the long term, not necessarily the short term. Um, Joseph Randle has a back injury. Its extent we're not sure of yet, but it kind of gives McFadden immediate control of a committee situation that otherwise was kind of in flux. So there's that. Oh, I'm sorry. It was reported as a back in the game. It's now an oblique injury. So Darren McFadden becomes somebody to look at. Other than that, there's really, really not much. I mean, the other name that's out there is Alfred Blue. Arian Foster, again, tore his ACL. Or not ACL, he tore his Achilles. So we're dealing with him being out for the season again, and back to the same situation that you had at the beginning of the season, where Houston needs a running back. Who's it going to be? Alfred Blue ended pretty strongly right before Arian Foster came back. I think he had one of his his first and probably only 100-yard rushing game the week or two before Arian Foster came back into the mix. So that, I think, gives you another running back who you can target. Again, he doesn't have a great matchup either. He's going against Tennessee, whose defense has been either really good or really bad. So if that, I want to see his like his game against Tampa Bay. He had 139 yards and a touchdown, and then slowly worked out of the system once Arian Foster was back. Once Arian Foster was back, Arian Foster took all the touches and made every other running back on Houston expendable. So that's another player to look out for. The last player I'll mention is probably somebody who's more of a long-term look. And I wouldn't even say stash them, but I would say place a tag on them. Somebody to look at is Orleans Dakwa. He's the Giants running back. He scored this week. I feel like he's gonna take the position that Andre Williams did as the bruiser, kind of goal line back. He's a little bit more explosive than Williams. Maybe a little bit better vision. I think the one thing he probably lacks is he's probably a little bit smaller in size, but he plays bigger than he is. I feel like the reason I say watch him is because to me Rashad Jennings hasn't looked right in a couple weeks, and there might be a lingering injury there that might force him out. Like if he goes down in like a game in the next couple weeks, I wouldn't be surprised. And then he becomes a legitimate running back to play in your flex because Shane Vereen is a situational football player. He's good on third downs. He's good in obvious passing situations. He's great out of the backfield. That's when the Giants are going to utilize him. But Orleans Dakwa could become that player, especially if Jennings goes out, that gets 20 touches. And the Giants' own line isn't great, but they are getting. I think what they're missing is a running back with some kind of explosiveness and vision to make them look better. Because they're also getting players back on that O line that are going to open up some better holes. You have the rookie who the Giants drafted from Miami. He's coming back. I want to say in a week, not this week, but the week after. So you're talking about getting more strength, more beef on that line, and just people with the ability to move people out of the way. And so Dakwa becomes a kind of a distance look, but somebody that I'm not going to stash now, but somebody I'm going to tag with a watch. At least on NFL.com, you can watch players, and that's one of the players I'm going to look at going forward. Well, let's see. Yeah, but other than that, like we mentioned, the running back position is just it's rough this week. Yeah, I mean, Kyrie Robinson had a couple of touchdowns. He's been a vulture all season, taking away touchdowns, but I can't justify starting him. Yeah, there's just very little there. In terms of wide receiver, there's a couple different options. Ty Montgomery coming back from injury. The problem with Tevin Coleman is that, I think we mentioned spot open, nothing much on the waiver wire except Blue and Aqua. Should I pick one up, or do you think it's best? Well, the handcuff to own depends on your situation. One handcuff, going forward to monitor is Starks in Green Bay. Eddie Lacy hasn't been right, and we won't know how he's gonna. We're gonna find out a lot about how he is against Denver. If he doesn't dominate the touches against Denver, James Starks becomes somebody to really consider owning because he's got explosiveness. He's done well in his limited work. So he's somebody to look at from the backup at Green Bay. Alfred Blue, I think, is currently one of the best names on the waiver wire. Oh, Forte, McCoy, Chris Ivory. Forte. I just don't like Forte's situation. Um, Chris Ivory is probably Bilal Powell. Um, but Chris Ivory, doesn't have much of an injury history. If there's anyone, I would say LaShawn McCoy. Um, the only problem is his backups are Dixon and Anthony Dixon and what's the other running back's name? Carlos. Carlos. Carlos Williams. Yeah, Carlos Williams has had good games. It's just he's as injury prone as LaShawn McCoy, so it's a tough situation to handicap. Um, I would say go with somebody because in each of those situations, when you look at handcuffs, you're really looking to see if somebody will come into a situation where they'll immediately have fantasy value. I don't think Forte. I think Forte is a unique animal. There's not much you can do if Forte goes down. Um, there's no one that replaces him in terms of being that good of a pass catcher out of the backfield, while still being elusive enough to go between the tackles. Chris Ivory, I would say, is a good handcuff because the Jets are still going to run the ball with Bilal Powell. Maybe a little bit of Zach Stacy, but it's pretty clear that Powell's the number two. Um, the only thing is, I don't know if Chris Ivory doesn't have a history of injury. He was just underutilized as a Saint, and again, because he was underutilized, he doesn't have that many miles on his tires. He's pretty fresh as a running back, for all intents and purposes. Um, LaShawn McCoy, I think, is the most injury prone out of the three. Uh, but also, when you consider that Buffalo is currently on a bye, he's getting. Or are they on a bye? I thought they were on a bye. No, they are on a bye. They're on a bye, so when you're coming back, you're potentially looking at him having another week of rest. You have a running quarterback in that system already, and potentially some healthy receivers. Um, and then with the injury history of the backup in Carlos Williams, you don't know whether it's going to be Williams or Dixon. I just don't think it's worth grabbing one of those players and then, grabbing the player who's still injured. Um, in my opinion, out of the people you've named, I would go with Alfred Blue just because he's going to get the work. Even if he's not somebody you put in your lineup right now, he's going to get the work in Houston. Whereas, and Houston's going to run the ball. They're going to be in, a good amount of games that are going to be blowouts just because of how poorly their defense has been playing. And it's mostly on their secondary who just can't tackle. Um, but at the same time, Alfred Blue is the clear replacement, and at least for the short term, is somebody that you can, handcuff with. Um, Out of the three, if you were dead set on handcuffing somebody, handcuff McCoy, um, just because of his injury history. Who you handcuff him with? Probably Carlos Williams. I mean, Dixon did nothing to earn the job, so Carlos Williams has had good games this season. Yeah. I mean, a second option, if you don't want to do Blue, is, or not if you don't want to do, if you can't get Blue, is go with Ivory go with handcuffing Ivory. I mean, handcuffing McCoy, like I said, is probably the safest handcuff because he might actually use Carlos Williams. Um, but handcuffing Ivory gives you the biggest potential upside, because you really won't lose much in the jump from Ivory to Bilal Powell. Ivory's a better back, obviously, but Bilal Powell, those handoffs, those carries aren't leaving the Jet system. They didn't leave with the coach. They're not going to leave with Ivory going down. So, yeah. I say pick up. Yeah, the thing, Ivory's dominated the touches so consistently this season, but even if you just look at the Jets, oh, that's not what I meant to pick. Bilal Powell has the second most carries. Uh, I wouldn't worry about Stephen Ridley. I didn't know Bilal was injured. Oh, okay. Oh, injured ankle. Okay.
Here's a real social experiment for you. Silk plant-based beverages came to Chicago to...
Yeah, I would. I know. Currently, Stacy's getting the work, but once Bilal's back, he's the clear number 2. I guess your worry is if that ankle injury is lingering. I'm not worried about Stephen Ridley, mainly because in my mind he doesn't fit what the Jets want to do with the running back position. He may end up being that change of pace back down the line, and that's if he still has the speed from his injury. I mean, he kind of worked himself out of a job in New England, partly because of injury, but also because he was not able to hold on to the ball during parts of his Patriot career. I don't know Bilal's status, other than the ankle injury, but I would see where that is. If he's a week away, you have a week to wait, because Chris Ivory, even Chris Ivory goes down this week, that's during the game. So you've already put him in. You've already pot committed. Unless Bilal's injury is serious enough where they're considering him 3 or 4 weeks down the line, I say him, because he's the player that, in my mind, has a bigger upside. Stacy had a good season in St. Louis 3 years ago, but not a good enough season to keep them from drafting 2 running backs in back-to-back drafts. Seeing something that they liked, and he was out of work as soon as they drafted Todd Gurley, and with legitimate reasons. Stacy is a good replacement back. He's situational. He's hard nosed, but he doesn't give you what Ivory does. Let me see. Yeah, so on the running back position, as kind of we've gone over, there are some people out there that I like, but it's really bare. Melvin Gordon's out there for some people. He's injured. He's got a fumble problem. I stay away from him. I'm not surprised he's dropped. Yeah, I've seen Langford mostly through highlights. I don't catch that many Bears games, but mostly through highlights. And the preseason, he played a little bit in the preseason. I liked Joey Bell coming into the season, but then I got frustrated with the Lions. So first to Langford. Langford, it's not my problem with handcuffing the Bears backup is, even though Langford is probably a good enough player, the Bears' situation is bad. Their line is bad. Everything they do on defense puts them in shootout caliber games. And the one thing Forte gives you is this back out of the backfield option, this decisive pass catcher. They'll line him up as a wide receiver at times, and he can catch the ball. Langford might have great hands. I don't know. But he's not as versatile as Forte. And the only reason I can say that with some certainty is because there are few, if any, other running backs aside from maybe Jamal Charles and Arian Foster, both of whom are out with injury, that are as versatile as Forte. So that's the only reason I would shy away from the Bears situation as a backup. He'll get work, and he may get work in blowouts, in garbage time. There's a lot of potential for him there, but in terms of getting somebody who's going to be a very good utility for you, I think there are better handcuffing options. Joique Bell has a great upside if the Lions ever get their act together, and I think they will. And I think a lot of people have given up on Joique Bell. Just because he's been injured to start the season. And then Amir Abdullah had such a interesting start to the season with, very few carries, but huge home run type of runs, like, 40-yard touchdown dashes with speed and quickness and elusiveness. And, Detroit fans are like, oh, Reggie Bush, it's Reggie Bush. Kind of like, there we go. We got rid of Reggie and we got a new Reggie. So this is our speed guy. This is where our offense is driven. That dump off, and that was the player who took a lot of Bell's value in the past. So I think that there's some thought that that's what's going to happen again. But as we've seen, Abdullah's kind of slowed down as the Detroit Lions offense has slowed down. And I think Detroit needs to get back to what they were doing a couple years ago, which is giving Stafford better down and distance situation to manage, so that on 3rd and 4, you can get the first down, but you could also take the shot to Calvin Johnson, or go to Golden Tate. Even Eric Ebron has had some decent games of late, so I think they have enough on the outside that Joique Bell becomes a good running back, because that should be, on paper, that should be a really good offense. And at some point, you have to play, especially when you're deep into the season like this, where there are few good options. You have to play the odds that Detroit will figure it out. Like Miami, eventually will figure it out, and I think they have in some ways. So. That's kind of what I'm banking on. I would say Joique Bell's a good option, especially if you're talking about who would I rather take a flyer on. I'd rather take a flyer on Joique Bell than Blue. I mean, I might still want to handcuff somebody first. If I still have that slot, I might want to handcuff somebody first. But Bell is a great option to take a flyer on. Comes to wide receivers, in the 10-team league, there are great options. In the 12-team league, there are some okay options. Stevie Johnson, I think, now that he's back, is a good option. He gave me some good utility in a few games earlier this season. I had him as a flex play. He did okay for a couple of games, so I think getting back into that offense. The Chargers have just such a high-powered, high-octane offense. A lot of passes. Even their running backs. Danny Woodhead is mainly a pass-catching running back. So he's available. Kamir Aiken is another player I used. Obviously, I dropped. Kamir is probably a player that is now is on the cusp. Like, he's the player I would watch, because Steve Smith is dealing with a rib injury. He's been able to play through it, but you know, he's not a big receiver. He's an older guy. So if Steve Smith again goes down, Kamir Aiken filled his role really well for a couple weeks. He didn't have as big of games as you would probably expect filling in for Steve Smith, but he definitely was targeted a ton in Steve Smith's absence. So he's somebody to look at. Again, if you're in that position, if you have a roster spot, who's a good dude to take a chance at, to stash for a second, and he might become that guy. If you're looking for somebody who's, who you need something out of immediately, I know it's hard to, bet on any player that, you haven't seen much from so far this season. Torrey Smith is not a name I trust. He's had some decent games, but like that, he didn't catch a pass against Seattle. Seattle's a good defense, but you're talking the NFC West. There's a lot of good defenses in the NFC West. He's playing Seattle this week, which isn't going to give you immediate help. Danny Amendola, I mean, he's had some big games of late. But that's just a byproduct of the Patriots. I mean, the Patriots are going to, throw the ball around a lot. So they also, the one thing I will give Danny Amendola is the Patriots have some really good matchups going for the next few weeks. Miami, who they've tended to dominate in the past, and it's at home for the Patriots. Washington is again at home for the Patriots, and is a team that has, an iffy secondary. And the Giants, who probably will have Prince Akamura back by that time. So their secondary with Akamura and Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie is passable, and can play that tight coverage that they are going to need to against the Patriots. But still, it's a game that I feel like the Patriots are going to probably try to impose their will on the Giants. So there's some good matchups coming up for Danny Amendola, and he's a player that's not owned a lot, but he's clearly the third option behind Julian Edelman and Gronk. But then again, Brady is throwing like 35 passes a game. So even if 5 or 6 targets go his way, in the Patriots offense, he's better in PPR than he is in standard leagues. But he's a player I would look out for. There was one other player that I looked at earlier. Maybe it was in the 10-team format. Yeah, see, in this 10-team format, Stephon Diggs is available. When I said I had him in 2 leagues, this is the 3rd league that I'm trying to get him in. The only league I couldn't get him in, it was the money league. But he's available. I mean, this is for anybody else who might catch this on VOD stuff. If Stephon Diggs is available, just look at his last 3 games. That should tell you all you need to know. 200-yard efforts, and 87 yards against Denver is a good game. So there are some options there. Other player who, this might be another long shot, is Victor Cruz. Odell Beckham Jr. is kind of still being bothered with a hamstring injury. I like Hearns. I actually had him in another league. I don't have him in this league, clearly, because he's on the on the waiver wire. But I feel like in this league I have let's see. Other than trying to pick up Stephon Diggs, I'm waiting on Des Bryant, who's probably a week away. I have T.Y. Hilton. I have Antonio Brown, who's getting Ben Roethlisberger back. I have Keenan Allen, who's been, for most of the season, done really well. He had a like one off game against Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, so 2 off games. But the Cincinnati game, he also was injured in. He got hurt in. So my wide receiving core is pretty decent. Especially once Dez gets back. Once Dez gets back, it's going to be tough for me to utilize the receivers that I do have. And I think I like Diggs better than I like Hearns. Just because Hearns is got Allen Robinson, and he's got to compete with the fact that he's still on the Jags. I mean, not that the Jags are a bad team, but they're so inconsistent with their level of play and who they go against. Whereas the Vikings, I feel like I know what I'm getting from the Vikings. I feel like I know they're Adrian Peterson first, but now that he's the number one target and he's earned Bridgewater's trust, I like him better. I like him a lot, actually. Yeah. I mean, the real reason I didn't pick up Hearns is because I didn't need to. I had enough receivers to get me through in this league particularly. But I have him in another league. He's not a player that I'm at all down on. Austin Seferian-Jenkins is probably 1 week closer. None of the tight ends in his absence have actually done anything to service Jameis Winston. And Jameis Winston is starting to play better, even though they lost this weekend in a foolish way. I feel like that the Bucks. Yeah, I feel somebody should own him. Him going unowned is not smart in this league's part. But yes, he's the team that I have in this league. He's kind of not a priority. Yeah, I like Diggs better. Like you said, I just like Diggs better. I also like the fact that he's not really competing with anybody. He's earned wide receiver number 1 status on his team. There's really nobody else that's going to challenge him for it. Hearns has Allen Robinson. Hearns has to deal with the fact that there aren't as many options for them in Jacksonville. The one thing that makes Diggs so attractive is he has Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson does so much. A great running back does so much for a team. It's hard to put a price tag on it. He covers up a line that might not be playing well because teams will stack the box against him and you can play action. He'll cover up a blitz, a team that blitzes too aggressively because he can pick up the blitz so well. He'll cover up a young quarterback because he'll catch passes out of the backfield, or he'll have such a good running game that it gives the quarterback one-on-ones on the outside. Adrian Peterson does a lot for the Vikings. You saw the difference between the Vikings last year without Adrian Peterson and the Vikings this year is enormous. They're a different team. Obviously they're a team that can win, but they're a team that their defense wasn't bad last year. It's just that they were always on the field. The offense really couldn't do anything without AP, and now that he's back, Diggs is one of the main beneficiaries along with Teddy Bridgewater. But in tight ends, there's a lot of tight ends that I think have play. Jordan Cameron against New England, even though Cameron's had a bad season, New England's linebackers are iffy at best, and their secondary is their weak spot. Plus, I don't think Miami's going to have as much success with Lamar Miller as they did last week. Unfortunately for whoever trades for him this week to go against you. Eric Ebron is another player that I like, just because kind of the same thing. Similar themes are coming up again, in that I feel like the Lions are at some point going to get this together. I would bet on the Lions getting it together more so than I would bet on, a risky third option or somebody who's not really getting the targets. Jordan Reed, I don't know why he's unowned in this league. Again, this is the 12-team league, so Jordan Reed should be owned. I know he's got a bye week, so he's not going to help you this week, but going forward, he's up there in terms of tight ends, just because of the amount of targets he gets from Kirk Cousins. So there's, those are like 4 tight end names that I would say go out and look at. Julius Thomas is also on this list. He has a groin injury again. When he's played, he's done well in the 2 games where he's been able to finish. It's just there are other options, but he's somebody to take a deep flyer on. In terms of defenses, this 12-team league has very little, but you see a lot of what you're going to get this week is teams that were on bye last week that are off bye and have good matchups. Yeah, Heath Miller has this is the 12-team league, so he wasn't on the board, but because he's owned in this league, mainly because of early season. Somebody had him at the beginning of the season and never dropped him, which I don't quite understand, but I kind of do, because tight ends have been so terrible. And if you have one that he's been salvageable in some weeks, he's been completely absent in others. But there's some utility to owning him. And once Big Ben's back, yeah, Big Ben targets Heath Miller a lot. But what I was saying in terms of defenses is there's a lot of teams that are coming off of byes that are coming into matchups where you can play them. Minnesota at Chicago. I like the Minnesota defense. I trust Minnesota's defense more than I trust Chicago's offense. The Bengals at Pittsburgh. This kind of goes into my theory that Ben Roethlisberger is going to need a week to, get back. It's more of a bet and more of a gamble than some of the other games, but it's one that I would trust just because of how attacking the Bengals defense is. You see the Giants defense as rated number 1, and they're going against New Orleans, who's been up and down. I don't really trust that game, even as a Giants fan. I know Prince Makamukamura is still out, so we're down one of the better corners on the team, probably the better corner. It's him and Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie. The Giants had a good effort against the Cowboys, but then again, the Cowboys were starting Matt Castle. Matt Castle is not Drew Brees. Drew Brees, even hurt, is not Matt Castle. The Saints have been doing it a lot on the ground, and that's been the weakness of the Giants so far. And I don't know if the takeaways are going to be there. Drew Brees has been throwing a lot of interceptions, but I'm saying the takeaways in terms of, the Giants' defense is ranked highest on this list because they've gotten a lot of touchdowns. 2 pick sixes, a return touchdown. I mean, they've been, when they play Dallas, they get touchdowns. So all 3 of those touchdowns are attributed to Dallas. So I would say that if you're looking at a matchup, the Vikings, Bengals, potentially Titans. I don't know what to do with the Titans. They've had really good defensive weeks and really bad ones. But you probably have a defense on your team. If your defense is on bye, then there's some options out there. Kansas City at Detroit is another one that I'm wary of because, I feel like Detroit will get it together. But Kansas City tends to play well at home. They play well at Arrowhead. They're coming off a very good game. they're starting to, ground it out a little bit more, chew some more clock. That makes the game lower scoring. They do have a secondary in place that can do things in Peters and in Eric Berry, even though they've been beaten a lot this season. So I see Kansas City having some potential, but they're not the ones that I'm probably going to grab. I think I'm going to go with the Vikings, just because I completely don't trust Chicago. That kind of does it. I don't know if there's any more questions from you drinking or anybody else in the chat. I've seen like a bunch of people go through. We've had like as many as 10 viewers at different points, but some spam obviously. But it's been eventful if nothing else. Yeah, it's gonna be. This is kind of like the midpoint in the season, or your fantasy season. We're in week. Where were we? Week 8, 7. I think we're in. Oh, we're in week 8. So week 8. If you include fantasy playoffs, it's the midpoint of your season. So it's a good point. If you're in the middle of the pack like I am, I'm in my money league, I'm 4th out of 12. Yeah, there's not much out this week. I think the couple of big names are going to be highly targeted. Blue, Mike Evans is available in this league. Blue, Ryan Fitzpatrick. Yeah, there's not much. But Darren McFadden's a name just to throw out there. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just don't understand why he's out here. I mean, I guess he wasn't doing well, but he's the number 1 receiver on the team. That boggles my mind. But yeah, that changes everything, right? Is this the 10-team league? Please let this be the 10-team league. Yeah, okay, this is the 10-team league. Okay, I was about to question my competitive league. Evans should not be available. But yeah. Alright, well that's going to do it from me. Thanks again for everybody in the chat. Thanks again, drinking. I will catch you all on Friday at the correct time. We went a little late today, but that's okay. That's good. I will catch you all on Friday at around 6:30, and I will see you then. Have a good one.